So our next panel is going to talk about journeys in Mexico, India, and the U.S. And the moderator is Lily Frost, who is standing here next to me. You might notice, I'm not sure, that she has a brace on her leg and a cane. She went down a water slide. Gracefully, I'm sure. But she is here 6 weeks now? 9 weeks post water slide, and sharing the benefit of her story and her panel with us. She's going to do a panel because she started out as an egg donor. She founded a donor agency. That wasn't quite enough. So then she founded an organization to try to evaluate, establish, and implement ethics called SEEDS, Society for Ethics in Egg Donation and Surrogacy. So she's very passionately committed to this process, to your success, and to doing it right. And I will turn it over to Lily.
Thank you very much. Yes, so what we're discussing here today is just the journeys that intended parents have faced in the various locations. And we're missing one person, it looks like. So we will go ahead and get started otherwise. But it's not necessarily, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, kind of what we discussed, what can go wrong and how to cope, but just more how did they come to the decision of surrogacy, what made them choose the particular country that they chose, and kind of what do they regret or appreciate about the choice they make, and what advice would they have to give you guys. So let's go ahead and start with Jody and Shannon Bowen. And I'm going to go ahead and have you guys just share your story, and then we'll open it up to questions after the fact.
Okay. Well, we've been married for about 6 years, and when we got married, we pretty much knew that I would not be able to, this is Hazel, to become pregnant and carry a child. We didn't really discuss at length when we got married what we would do. We knew. Maybe I knew that I wanted to have a family. I didn't know how. And then I was pushing the issue more and more, and Jody was listening to the radio on the way home from work one day to NPR and heard about Creative Family Connections in DC, and we lived in Richmond. And he told me about it, and we got really excited. We knew about surrogacy. I'd seen it on TV shows, but it seemed like something that other people did. It didn't seem feasible. I didn't know how to do it, so I didn't even really consider it. But when he was telling me about it, we decided, I think that night actually, we emailed them and met with them the next week. I did a little bit of investigation on the internet and saw about, really, we didn't do a lot of research. We trust NPR as our news source, and we met with Creative Family Connections, and we felt really comfortable with them. They had a great reputation. Like I said, we didn't do a lot of, comparison shopping really, because we felt good about what we heard. We felt good about the way they found their surrogates, the screening process for that sounded great, and mostly they knew what they were doing. I get really stressed out about everything anyway, so for a process that involves a lot of legal things that can happen, a lot of different ways things can go, it's better for me to let somebody who knows what they're doing handle that, and they did, and they'd done it before and they had great success rates. They offered to let us talk to people who were in the process of doing it and who had already completed the journey. So it seemed like a good fit, and a year after we signed the contract, we were a couple months pregnant, and then we have Hazel. So I'm sure I just skipped over a lot of stuff because I'm very nervous.
How did the process start? So can you kind of break down like from first contact? Because it sounds like, so a year, it was about a year until pregnancy. So what went on during that year?
Well, we met with them in April, and then we had to figure out how we were going to get the money to actually be prepared to start. And we signed the contract in August, And then they got a lot of information about what we were looking for in a surrogate and matched us with a surrogate who met kind of what we wanted someone within driving distance who had passed their screening process. I mean, we trusted them, and
they also walked us through, within the U.S., there's only certain states where surrogacy is legal. There are certain states where it's illegal, and then there are certain states where they have no laws whatsoever. So they kind of walked us through what states would be good matches for us that were in driving distance for us. So we only had about 3 states that were really good options. So that kind of limited our search for surrogates within those 3 states.
And what state did your surrogate come from?
She came from Delaware, but we had intended to have the birth in Maryland. So Maryland, it turns out, has very good birth laws for surrogacy. And with us being in Virginia, it was kind of in between the 2 of us. So Maryland was kind of where it was supposed to happen. That did not happen. She actually gave birth in Delaware. And so I would say, given that Delaware was kind of one of those gray states, and it actually was a huge benefit just having an agency that was also a law firm, because they really took care of the whole paperwork as far as birth documents. The hospital, they were aware we were going to be there, and they really just smoothed the way for us in a way that we could have never done ourselves if we had tried to go it alone, so to speak.
So what was the surrogate selection like for you? Were you presented with several profiles, or was it just the agency kind of saying this is the one that I feel is best for you? Or
well, they made a match, and we received information about the surrogate, and we read through it, and it sounded good, and then we met with the surrogate and her husband, and the agency was there too.
Okay.
So we met and had over coffee, and then we both went home, and we both felt like it was a really good match. I mean, and that too, I would say, for me at least, I went into the whole thing thinking I would have one relationship with the surrogate, and then after our first meeting with CFC, I thought that the relationship would be a whole different relationship, and I don't think you can know what that relationship is going to be until you start it. And I didn't become as close to her as I thought I would have during the process. But I will say, when I left the hospital, and she was at the hospital too because she had to have a C-section, that was the whole thing, the way it happened. That was the only time I almost started crying, was when I had to say goodbye to her. And probably we mostly texted throughout.
What sort of contact do you have with her now? Are you still in contact? Or?
At first it was really hard to stop texting her, like every single thing that Hazel did, because like for her birthday, Hazel sent her a birthday present. I picked it out, but probably last week I'll just send a picture and just ask how she's doing, and we both said, I think she's a lot like me, where it sounds like a great idea to like talk on the phone and do stuff, and I hope that we actually do. But when it comes down to it, we both end up.
You're busy.
Yeah, we text each other, but we would like, when Hazel gets a little bit older, I'd really like to put a person to the name, and like for her to know that Jessica's a person, and for just to all seem normal from the get-go. I mean,
so is there anything that going into this you wish you would have known beforehand that you may have done differently, or just consider, or different expectations maybe?
I think we were really, really lucky. I just can't explain, especially the way the birth, it didn't happen exactly where we thought it would, and for me it seemed like a big deal, and maybe it's not, I don't know, but the relationship I had with the surrogate, she was awesome. The agency we chose was there for us, and when we walked into the hospital in Delaware, she had had the C-section the day before it was planned. And when I walked into the hospital, I don't know how they did it because I'm a nurse, and so it would be really hard. But they treated me like I was the mother from the minute I walked in, even though I obviously didn't just have a baby. And it was also neat to have Jessica in the hospital so I could take Hazel to see her, but it was just, it's just amazing that it can happen this way. And our agency was awesome, but the fact that people are doing it, it's becoming more and more normal. I'm just excited for everybody to be able to hopefully. She keeps me busy though. Anyway, you can say what
you know, as far as expectations, just in coming here and considering, the questions of the panel and so forth, there's a lot of, with just pregnancy in general, there's a lot of unknowns and anxiety. I think for us, having the surrogate nearby and an agency that we felt like we could trust were just two things that, we knew that beforehand. I don't think there's anything wrong with going through another country, but I think for us, I think it would have just added to the stress that I would have done it,
Yeah. And so what were you expecting it to cost when you went into it?
a lot. It did.
I mean, do you want like a real figure?
Yeah, like if you have like a number that you were kind of budgeting for.
On the low end, it was going to be about $100,000. We knew on the top end it could be $150, $160.
Okay, and then what, if you don't mind me asking, what did you guys end up spending?
It was somewhere in the middle of that.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like you guys had a fairly smooth process.
It was about as smooth as you could hope.
Okay.
I mean, the transfer took on the first try. That's definitely a big expense.
Yeah.
We were able to find our surrogate basically on the first match. The IVF clinic was right here in Virginia.
Which one did you use?
We went through Virginia Reproductive Medicine, and they've got a pretty good track record. Like I said, I would say one of the, probably, not to get off the topic, but one of the decisions that everybody's going to have to make is like, how many embryos do you want to have to implant? And after talking with the fertility specialist, we really decided on one. Just because he felt like, we had a young donor, we had a young surrogate, and, statistically, that's, your best odds. And, God forbid you don't really get in a situation where you might potentially have, you might have to make a very difficult decision about do you want to eliminate.
Right.
And also, do you want to put the surrogate's health at risk?
Right.
So that was probably one of the hardest decisions. I would say, as far as expectations, that's really something we need to think about and consider. How are you going to do that? For us, it was like, look, we're just going to take one embryo and hope for the best. It worked.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about U.S. surrogacy for them? Okay. Stacy.
Hello.
Stacy is not on the program, so this is a new addition, so welcome. And if you want to go ahead and share your story and just kind of generally, what some of the issues were, why you chose the route that you chose, what you would change if you could, things like that.
Sure. So I did surrogacy in India through SCI. During my childhood, I had cancer a couple of times, and the treatment left me without a uterus. And so my husband and I knew going into our marriage that we wanted to have a family, and that for him it was really important to have a genetic link. And so we did a lot of research on surrogacy, as everyone in the room is doing. and ultimately decided on surrogacy in India with our clinic. We emailed multiple clinics in India and felt that the communication with our particular clinic was the right fit for us. So in March of 2011, we met our surrogate, signed the papers. We had an Indian donor as well, and were lucky enough to get pregnant on the first try. We transferred 4 embryos and 3 took, which leaves you in India in a little bit of a bind because you can't legally carry 3 babies. And so nature's luck, at 10 weeks, one of them aborted. And so we were left with boy-girl twins that were born at 38 weeks via C-section. My husband and I felt really strongly that we were there for the birth, so we showed up 3 weeks before and twiddled our thumbs and waited for their arrival. And so we were at the hospital with our surrogate's husband for the entire day, holding our babies, watched them being pulled out of the operating room and handed to the pediatrician. And they were perfectly healthy, and we took them back to our apartment that we had rented the next day. And 11 days later, we were on a plane back to New Jersey. And for us, what could go wrong, or what went wrong? Absolutely nothing. What we were expecting to go wrong, a few things. But for us, it was really kind of an ideal scenario, ideal journey down this path. We now have 7 embryos, perfect grade, frozen in Delhi, that we're trying to figure out what to do with. So we may be going down this journey again in the near future. And that's how.
And so what made you choose, I'm sorry, I'm going to sit, my leg was up. What made you choose India?
So we met with a bunch of doctors in the U.S. Originally, we had thought that we would create the embryos in the U.S. and potentially ship them, potentially find a U.S. surrogate. For us, we knew we wanted to have more than one child, and we were very concerned about the upfront costs of U.S. surrogacy. If it went wrong or if it didn't take, how many times could we actually do this? We knew financially it would be a huge drain to have to do this multiple times, and then if we end up with one baby, that's great, but we really wanted more than one, so how do we save again to do the journey? We felt that the doctor that we found in India was trained at a hospital that my husband and I had both been to and were familiar with in London when we lived there. The hospitals that the questions that we got answers to beforehand, talking to other intending parents plus the clinic. The hospitals we found met our standards, and obviously the cost is a lot less, and the upfront cost is significantly less. The overall journey can vary depending on how it goes, but definitely what happens, the out-of-pocket before you get pregnant is significantly less than in the U.S., and that was a deciding factor for us to try India with the thought that if it did work, we financially could do the U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
And also the option to do this again.
Exactly.
Okay. And then what was the timeline from the time you decided to, by the time you signed up with the clinic, so when you had baby bumps?
So,
Or babies, excuse me.
I think it was about November that I contacted the clinic for 2 years prior, but it was in November that of 2010 that I contacted and said, okay, this is a go. I want to start looking at your donors. I want to start making decisions. We're ready to start planning the schedule, the cycle. We arrived in end of February, and returned in October, and then babies were born in early November, and we were home before Thanksgiving.
Great. And did you look into your insurance and were you able to see if there was any neonatal coverage for international?
We looked. The cost of neonatal care there we did some research. We basically had decided that we could pay cash and figure it out when we got home. The deductible was fairly high, so we knew we were in for quite a few days before it even made it necessary. I think Bernadette will probably speak better to that. In the end, our fees, we didn't have any additional fees for baby care because they were released 24 hours later.
And then what were your concerns, if any, heading into, what were some preconceptions that you had?
Some of my concerns, we had felt like we fully vetted sort of the surrogacy screening. We had a lot of information on, the surrogacy screening and their care during the time. I was a little bit concerned about the hospital. We have some family and friends in the Delhi area, so I was pretty comfortable that I had backup plans if it wasn't up to what I wanted the standard to be. In the end, that wasn't, for us, didn't end up being an issue.
Okay, and then as far as your relationship with your surrogate, did you want any?
So, that was a hard one for me because I couldn't quite figure out what I wanted. One of the things that scared me about U.S. surrogacy was the relationship with the surrogate, and attracted me was also the same thing, was the relationship. Because if it was a good fit and it was a good relationship, that's the ideal scenario. But if it was a bad fit and a bad relationship, that really scared me. So with India, there was minimal relationship, and my husband and I felt like that was probably a good fit for us in the way we were doing the journey. About halfway through the journey, I started to feel a little bit differently and wanted a relationship. And so, actually, strangely enough, I developed a relationship with another surrogate in the U.S., carrying babies for somebody else that actually delivered on the same day that ours were. Just from her, she
surrogate.
Yeah, exactly. She found our blog, and we communicated back and forth, and that made me realize that not all journeys are perfect, but potentially I would have chosen a different route for that reason. Choosing a different route means I have different kids, which obviously I don't want, but that to me was something that changed kind of during the journey. My relationship with our surrogate, I met her and her husband, we met them prior to transfer, and then during the pregnancy we sent gifts a couple of times. When we went back to India, we went to a couple of ultrasounds with her. And then post-birth, we met her and with the kids, or the babies, and said, chatted and said our goodbyes, basically. Since we've left India, I make books of pictures and stuff for her that I send to her. I've probably done it like 4 or 5 times. My kids are almost 3, and we talked to her before we left about if we were to ever come back to India. We didn't want to make any promises, but would she want to see them? And of course she would. And so we will, whether we go back for another journey or we just go back for pleasure, we will be taking our kids back to get to know India and hopefully her.
Okay. And then just touching on the surrogate aspect again, I know there was some kind of discussion a little bit ago about exploitation. Did you, in your experience, feel that there was an issue of exploitation with the surrogate you were working with at the service? Or did you have any concerns about that in general? And I say that only because it's something that comes up a lot in discussions with international surrogacy is, women who may be seen as at a disadvantage financially, and the pressures to move forward with surrogacy, whether be it for financial reasons or, well, generally financial reasons, but because maybe their family's pushing them into it or something along those lines. And I know you mentioned your surrogate's husband. So was there anything you could kind of glean from that relationship to give us some insight?
So I don't think any intending parent that goes to India, or at least I hope they don't, ask the same questions that everybody else asks about exploitation. And we each have to kind of terms with that on our own, what your definition of exploitation is. I did not feel that our surrogate in any way was exploited. Her husband and her had a very loving relationship. They were by all means not impoverished family that desperately needed this money. That was fairly clear. They personally were doing it for some education reasons for their sons, but I don't feel that they were exploited. We personally, especially having twins, didn't necessarily feel that the compensation was right for us that she was receiving through our clinic.
What was she? I'm sorry to add. I'm not familiar with India compensation for surrogates.
It was around $5,000.
Okay, so like the equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we gave her more. I mean, there's simple as that. We didn't feel that was enough, so we gave her more.
Okay, and then as far as when you entered, what budget did you have in mind?
When we entered, our budget was more about trying to get pregnant. So we had sort of a budget what we were willing to pay to how many tries. I think I'd mentioned this before, that we were prepared to do it 3 times and then reevaluate. For us, the clinic we used sort of had a package deal, so it includes all the fees, and we were really lucky to stay exactly on that.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for her? Yes.
I think it's like right now their package is like 1.3 million rupees, so like $25,000 to $30,000. Travel is a huge part of that.
A huge part in addition?
Additional cost, yeah.
And then what sort of legal expenses did you look at for getting back? Was it in addition, presuming it was also in addition to the $25,000-30,000?
Yeah, it was, but I think it was about $1,000.
Okay. Okay, and you found that process to be fairly straightforward?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else with questions? Yes.
You do not have to use theirs. We did plan to use theirs actually, but we ended up finding an Indian egg donor that we really liked. It just kind of clicked, and so we went.
My actual question is, it's just I'm always wondering, so like, do you and your husband have an idea, like, do you want to incorporate Indian culture for your children, or are you going to, what's your guys' thought? Because I always wonder that, like I carried babies and they were actually Indian.
Yeah.
So it was like vice versa.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering.
So my husband's of Indian descent, so it makes it a little bit easier. That makes it a little easier. But we definitely, part of going back to India, my husband actually went to India for the very first time when we went for our cycle. So by all means, he's not Indian from a cultural point of view, but we plan to take them back there and definitely incorporate that into their upbringing.
And I assume you know more. I'm just saying on the blogs and everything. You'll
Yeah.
find community. Do you find, and again, it's just more of a ethnographic kind of thing on my part. I just wonder, do a lot of Americans that use Indian egg donors today, do you see that they actually try to incorporate that child's heritage, or not really?
From the blogs I've seen, I think it probably sort of varies, but I would say a lot of them have spent enough time in India to kind of embrace the culture. And I think before they even start down the journey, have sort of needed to embrace the culture a little bit. We personally, I don't think incorporate it because of the journey, but that's our personal heritage.
Yes.
She did sign a contract. We signed it together in the same office with the lawyers. How she came to surrogacy, I don't exactly remember how she found out about it. I know she had 2 small sons that were about to enter elementary school, and she was doing it to help with tuition payments so that they would go to a better school. But I don't remember exactly how it was that she came to find out about surrogacy or how she found out about her doctor. No, the clinic that we used was also acted as our agency.
I think in most cases in India, the clinic and the agency are one and the same.
So it was the same attorney that the clinic actually has in-house that does it. Unlike the U.S., where the contracts, I think, are fairly personalized, they're fairly standardized there.
Okay, and so now let's move on to Bernadette to share I'm sorry, I pronounced your name right.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Phew. So she also did India, and she had more of a rocky experience, to say the least. So I'll pass the floor over to you. I'm going to yet again take a seat, and then I'll get back up to ask questions shortly.
Good afternoon. I also used the same clinic as Stacy, and we did have a very different experience. I think a lot of our reasons for going to India were similar, and one of the prominent reasons was, again, a difference was that we had tried many times in the U.S. and had not been successful, and it was that limited budget, and that in our mind, this is not going to work for us, and we needed to know that we could try as many times as we could with the lowest upfront cost. And in fact, even after trying in the U.S. multiple times, it took us 4 gestational carriers. We transferred 4 embryos each time, so that was 16 embryos in India alone, in addition to all the transfers we had done into the U.S. We ultimately became pregnant with, we did 2 surrogates at a time, which you can't do in India anymore, but we became pregnant with 1 surrogate with 1 embryo and 1 surrogate with twins. We lost the surrogate with the single embryo around 12 weeks, and we're told that embryo had cystic hygroma. And the twins survived until 29 weeks, and at that point I got a call one Friday morning and was told that they had been born very early. And 10 days later, I got on the plane a one-way ticket, and it was very different than what I expected, because I had waited so long to meet these children, and here they were in a foreign country, in a NICU, and a level 5 NICU. They were both born not breathing, and it was scary, and it was lonely. But one of the things about international surrogacy that I don't know that you will find anywhere else is this beautiful community of people. And if you walk out into the hallway, my daughter is there with one of my very best friends, who I met 2 days ago, but who I formed a friendship with 2 years ago when my children were born. And we've had a lot of similar experiences, but I was supported by all these other families that were in India, and I was there alone, and my daughter, fortunately, after 2 months, was out of the NICU. My son, Hayden, around 3 or 4 months, it was pretty obvious that he was having some significant health issues beyond typical preemie problems. And I would say around 4 months is when I sort of began that battle with the insurance company to get a medevac plane to come over and get him out of India, because they simply did not have the resources to keep him healthy. He was beyond their knowledge. We did get a plane they were born in March 2012. I got a plane in August 2012. came over, took myself, my daughter, and my son home, and my son Hayden was immediately transferred to Hopkins. He was diagnosed with a very rare form of epilepsy called Oderhart syndrome, and he passed away 2 weeks before their first birthday. My daughter Scarlett, who's here today, is phenomenally healthy and wonderful, and we always say she is living life for the both of them. I would say that with international surrogacy, I did all my homework. I talked to intended parents. It was a reputable clinic. I think it did certainly change from the time we signed on to when we arrived in India, and that was simply because of the volume of clients that it took on. But you can't insulate yourself from babies being born early or babies being born with health problems or just a significant number of uncontrollable variables. And so you can tailor your expectations to what you would hope they will be, and then you can prepare for the worst. What happens if you have a sick child who needs to be evacuated? What happens if your medical costs exceed well beyond what you would ever anticipate them to be? What happens if your babies are born early? Can one of you leave your job early? These are things that you hope are not going to happen, but that could happen. And that you can't, no matter how much you plan, you can't insulate yourself from them. And, but it's worth it. I have two beautiful children. I have a beautiful community of friends who have supported me through this journey, roles that nobody locally could ever fill because nobody gets what it means to be wanting to be a parent so bad. I have gained beautiful friendships in India. One of the things I was most disappointed about, I did not get to meet my surrogate. I hadn't planned on necessarily that being so important to me, but when I was in India, I particularly wanted to, simply for Scarlett's sake, because I just wanted a picture with her. And because I wasn't sure how that was going to play out years later. And unfortunately, the clinic told me she had already left for her village, which I'm not sure if she had or not. There choose your battles, and it's okay. I formed a beautiful relationship with one of the nurses that cared for Scarlett, and we still Skype and we stay in touch. And I'm sure we will go back at some point to visit her. So things are not necessarily going to go the way you plan, but if you are aware and open to the possibilities and the gains that you can have to sort of compensate for the loss that may happen, you can still have a really beautiful journey.
Thank you. So what, is there anything that you would have done differently knowing everything you know now? So for people who are just going into it, is there, something that you want to kind of impart on them?
No, and I think that's the most important thing. You have to go into this process with no regrets. If you have to set a budget. You have to, and perhaps your budget is we're going to only spend X amount of money, or your budget is we are going to spend everything we have, because that's where we are on this scale. And you have to set those expectations that you're personally comfortable with. And so that way, when all these things happen and you end up living in India for 5 months and you leave your job and your son passes away, you can still say, I'm still grateful for this journey. I'm still grateful I got to be a mom. And I think that's the most important thing, is you can't set unrealistic expectations, because I can't imagine what it would feel like to have regrets about my journey at this point.
Okay, and then as far as insurance and cost and things like that, what are your comments?
So our costs far exceeded what we thought they would. I was living in India for 5 months. I had 2 children in the NICU, one for 2 months, one for 5 months, and then a medical evacuation. That's still a sort of touchy subject. One thing I can say, though, when I needed to get my son home to Hopkins, people all around the world started a fundraiser for us, people I had never met, and raised a significant amount of money to get us out of India when we were really running out of money. And again, that is something I think that I know firsthand is something in the international surrogacy community that is so incredible, is that community of support.
Okay. And then which clinic did you?
We use SEI.
Okay. Okay. And then I'm going to ask the same question that I asked her, just about exploitation and your thoughts. And again, I touch on this again because it is one of the things that we see a lot of in the media when people reference international surrogacy. And I think it's really important that we hear from people who have firsthand knowledge, and not just, you hear a lot of, these surrogates are doing this, that, the other. And as someone who's working in Mexico and knows a very large number of surrogates, my experience has been different. And I frankly had a lot of those same notions about India about a year and a half ago. And it's just very interesting to me kind of hearing what people have actually seen in India be the relationship. So if you want to comment on that.
I think that there's only so much you can do to vet what's actually going on, and at some point you have to believe what your clinic is telling you. And I didn't get the opportunity to ask my surrogate personally how much she was getting paid. I knew from our contract how much she was expected to get paid and how much money I gave the clinic to pay her. But in terms of our surrogates being exploited, I don't think so. But it's also not a burden, I think, as intended parents that we can carry around wondering if everything we're doing is being followed through by third parties. I think that you can do so much research and you can pay the money that you are asked to pay, and you can hope that things will be followed through with, and then you have to let go of the fact that you're not responsible whether other people are following through. India is a very different country than the U.S., and I always like to say there are no rules there. So do I think everything is clear cut as the U.S.? Certainly not. I found that from everything from market parking to cab driving to whatever it was, everybody's paying someone else higher up the chain. But again, do I think that IPs are exploiting surrogates over there? No.
Okay. And then, so I guess you kind of answered my next question, which is transparency. Do you feel like there's a level of transparency, or do you just kind of feel like let go and let it happen and trust the process and kind of hope for the best outcome?
I think that like any clinic in the U.S. or any other country varies from clinic to clinic and agency to agency, and I think that the best way to verify that is to talk to intended parents who have recently gone through the process. I will say one thing about international surrogacy: I think it changes very frequently, and clinics change depending on with the hot clinic and the volume of clients and such as. And so, talking to parents who have gone through the process recently, I think, is key in terms of finding out is what they're telling you, what's actually going on there.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for her? Yes.
Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of hospital bills because the two children had been in the NICU for months, and then there was a medevac plane flying in from Canada, which was quite costly to get us home, and so we had a lot of medical fees at that point to help us.
So it's not with the exit process or any legal aspect?
No. I would say in terms of costs of the exit process, there's minimal costs. Maybe under $1,000 in terms of visas and passports, and we did hire somebody simply to put the paperwork together, just because I had a lot of stressful stuff going on. I'm sorry? Oh, yes. So generally the way our clinic worked was you could not get access to your birth certificates until the IVF clinic, until the IVF clinics are paid, and then they don't let you leave with with your children until you're paid at the hospital. So yeah, they don't let anybody leave the hospital until you've paid the hospital bill. And I think that's very important to them.
And then also, in order for you to get your visa to exit India, you have to show that your medical bills are paid.
Yeah, and that's the same with any country. I mean, we have that here in the U.S. as well. Anyone else? Yes.
Well, I'm excited to meet you too, and I think our children are playing out in the hallway, which is so neat. I mean, it's just such a there's so many gains from this process that are really unique to taking this unique road to parenthood. Yeah.
Well, it depends on the case. I've definitely had some issues getting visas, especially in relationship with China, and having to show proof that everything's been paid off. Yeah, I think it may just be the country that you're headed to. Maybe that's the issue. Yep.
And just more on the reason we talked about it today. So we heard earlier about how, oh gosh, people who have children born here get surrogacy and like taking them back into citizenship. What's the process that you guys have to go through? I don't know. Like, do you guys have to do like the whole DNA testing, or is the U.S. pretty good about, yeah, you can maybe like come on in?
So well, it's interesting because I think right before, I know up until March 2012, I think there had sort of been a lull for our clinic in terms of DNA testing.
Yeah, so ours,
sort of.
our specific clinic had gone through interviewing from the embassy and gone through some like controls that, it's my understanding, allowed them to not, the U.S. Embassy did not require a DNA test to exit. So that's one of the reasons that I was able to leave in 11 days, which included 4 holidays, which is something to be aware of in India, is because we did not require a DNA test. I think it's, truthfully, we were sort of in the situation where I felt like they should require a DNA test, given the fact that the U.S., you acquire citizenship via DNA, so it would only make sense that they legally required you to prove it. We did not have to, and my kids look identical to my husband, so there's never been a question of their DNA.
I think so. Then they, as India does, they frequently change their minds. So the process was DNA, getting a passport, getting an exit visa. Exit visas are only good for so long, so I actually got 2 exit visas because we kept thinking we were going to get home and then we'd have to replan again. But it was pretty straightforward. Again, in the past 2 years, I think it has changed significantly, so I think that's where, particularly those kinds of issues, it's really important to talk to IPs who have gone through the process recently to figure out what's happening now and what is the process and what kinds of fees and timeline do I need to plan for.
Perfect. All right. So we are actually do we have time for one more question? One more. Okay, go for it.
I was going to say that for India now, like right now,
Hi.
in India now, U.S. citizens are no longer required DNA testing. So your exit time is pretty much 5 to 6 days. They no longer require DNA.
In Mexico, it's the reverse. They were not requiring DNA, and as of, I think, 4 weeks ago, they changed their rules to require DNA testing for all exits. Which, I agree with you. Makes sense, frankly. Okay, and that's it. We're out of time. If anyone has any questions on Mexico, because our Mexico couple, I believe, is dealing with some newborn baby stuff at the moment, either myself or IP Conceptions both work in Mexico and can help.